stop the video. Now let's rewind back to the beginning of my career as drop therapy. I apologize for the low audio quality. My Logitech USB microphone that I've been using stopped working recently. It all began on the 4th of April, 2015. I was 11 years old, and I had recently got an FL Studio, and I had released the first track called Genesis. Fitting name, because it was the first song I had ever made. It goes something like this.
Genesis. You feeling better yet?
As you can tell, the song kinda sucks, but cut me some slack. I literally made it after maybe my first experimental song the day I got FL Studio for the first time, so just give me a break. I then started to release more songs under the album name of Genesis, and I created things such as Killing It, Raining Bullets, and Drop_Therapy because I wanted a self-titled track so bad. Now, Killing It was the first drum and bass track I've ever created. Eventually, later in the beginning of 2016, I started making a whole bunch of other D&B tracks because it was so easy to make in FL Studio for me. But let's continue to talk about Genesis. Raining Bullets was my first, quote, jungle track. I didn't know the exact sound of jungle music at the time. I was close, but not really. And so I then created the track Raining Bullets, which was better than most of my songs on Genesis, but still not amazing. Here it is. I created most of the tracks on Genesis by just making patterns in FL Studio and then exporting them to Audacity, where I'd repeat them to create a song, which is why it sounds so choppy in my early days of making songs or whatever. I then continued with Imperfect, which was basically more of the same, but on a different album. I say that in quotes, it's not really an album. It's just me putting like 4 different songs together and then calling it an album. One song I can recall, however, as being a good song is Encounter, which goes something like this. As you can tell, this is actually a jungle song, but I didn't attempt to do anything. I was working on making, quote, EDM. Got most of my inspiration from button beats, so I thought EDM was just another subgenre of electronic music. So I was trying to create that, and instead I created a, quote, jungle track. This is more, sort of punk sounding, I don't know. Don't listen to me, I'm weird. My next album was probably the worst thing I'd ever done so far, in my opinion, because it was so repetitive. It did feature my first glitch hop song, however. It was more just glitch, whatever. Just glitch sounding EDM or whatever. But the first track is called Time in Reverse. Now if I can stop saying I can show you the track. Here it goes. that's basically the entire track, except I repeated it like 4 times because I learned that EDM is very repetitive and has a repetitive nature, and my method of doing that, and it still is my method today for some of my songs, is to repeat the main loop thing, whatever, until I add a solo, or until the song ends. But now I have solos and outros or whatever. Now I did mention a glitch hop song, and here it is. Time in Reverse was my 3rd album and the first one to start to not use Audacity at all. My next album, Odyssey, was more of the same. I didn't start to work on more songs on Odyssey until I released System Failure, which to me was probably the first album that I'd ever started to mark the change of my music. It was a very small change, but it was a change. It was also the beginning of my collaboration life, which also ended very shortly. I only collaborated with somebody else once, and it was on a very mediocre track. It was good. It was amazing for my standards, but it was good. It also had my first modern sounding house track on it. The synth and whatever. I did the drop and the percussion, as you can tell here. Time passed and I released Antimatter, which essentially was a slightly darker sounding techno album than most of my other stuff. And then, for me at the time, I released an album that was revolutionizing, you know, and so I then released it as Safety Last. The deal with this album is that it kind of fused techno with dubstep, and I called it Techno Step. Very underdeveloped, because I was not good at making dubstep. I did not know how to do all those wub sounds. At the time, for me, it was wubs, but for most of the dubstep community, there were growls now. I was stuck in 2011. It sounds like something from 1993 mixed with something from maybe 2010. Again, very underdeveloped. I use Citrus to make the dubstep growl sound, and if you listen closely, just listen to it. I used a different drum sample thing that did not work with the album at all. There are various other ones. It was mostly techno step, which is already a genre, but I thought I invented it. But there's a jungle song on it too. Went on and I released Dollhouse, which was just a dark techno album, except much darker than that of Antimatter. I tried to use sampling, and as you can tell, it didn't work. My voice was too high-pitched for the sampling part, but for the most part it was a success in my eyes, as I was trying to get it to a dark sound and it was dark enough. And yeah, it featured a very uplifting house track at the end. So again, time went on. I then went to my next album, Alone, which wasn't much different than Dollhouse, but had my first mastered track at the end. It was a drum and bass track.
We have a 138 in progress.
A revolution happened in my music. I started using automation clips and putting everything on a different track in the playlist. Because before, everything was like one pattern, one track, every pattern thing. Like you had one pattern, it was every instrument for that one part. And so I changed that, and this is what my music started to sound like. As you can tell, it sounds a lot different than most of my songs before that. Actually, all of my songs before that. It was my first dubstep track I was completely proud of. So yeah. I then went on to create other songs, such as Mutations and Bass Infiltration. I then released Venture, which was a throwback to the old times, I guess? I don't really know. But, I released a track called Psycho, which isn't, notable for anything particularly interesting, but it was the most interesting track that I have downloaded, so just listen to it, please, thank you. I then released Journey, which I wasn't particularly proud of, but featured 2 tracks that I was fine with. I'm gonna play the title track simply because it was featured in my 2016 art showcase. On the album was my first drum step song and my first MS Paint remix. Both aren't particularly good. I then released Ballistic Trance, which is only iconic here for the song Nightmares, which I'll further elaborate on in part 2, why it is so iconic. That's it for part 1. In part 2, I will be focusing on post YouTube and Vimeo accounts, where I'll be elaborating more on my videos and songs, of course, still, but mainly videos. See you then. Goodbye, everyone.